And thank you so much for inviting me here. It's great to be back in LACAS. I should say my academic journey kind of began very much at LACAS. And without a doubt, of course, a lot of what I have been doing and am doing has its inspiration in LACAS. And I do want to acknowledge, I used to be a very quiet kid up till O-levels. And my teachers thought, like he doesn't really talk and doesn't really engage. And then I came to LACAS, and then something happened, and now I can't stop talking. So that's a great benefit I had here. We were also very lucky, and of course, at that time, LACAS was very small. It only had a couple of hundred students, and the A-levels was just about 100 people. But we had a very good community atmosphere, and we had teachers that we have loved and known since that time. I won't tell you how far, when I came to LACAS, because that's, well, most certainly before all of you were born, and probably before your parents even met. So imagine, I'm that old now. But we had a great history teacher, Mrs. Sonu Rahman, that I'm sure her picture is somewhere here also in the corridors. She really created an inspiration in us to study history, to understand the subject of history. And even though we had a very small class, I'm very happy to say that we were only 4 in the class, so therefore we could get away with quite a lot of things. But all 4 of us have done great. It was me, Khatija Shah, if you recognize her name, from Milan, her husband, because of that, perhaps, I think Janzeb Amin, who runs a successful business also, and then Vasid Chaudhry, who's a scriptwriter, actor, and has done a number of things. So, doing A-levels in history leads you to many places. And I think the success that I think this LACAS group showed has, shown the importance of history. Now, I was thinking about your sort of theme today about Act Now, and I thought, well, what could a historian say about Act Now? And this really takes me back to my first LACAS week. The question was what subjects I should take. And unlike today, where you can pick practically any subject and you've got a huge choice, we didn't have that many choices. And amongst that, the question was, well, if you are 3 or 4 in a class, maybe that subject would not even be offered because, the university, the school can't afford it. But we were very kind of, headstrong people, and we said, no, we want to do history, and we want to study that. And I still remember the other subject I wanted to do, but eventually was not allowed to do, was human biology. And I was very good at that, But my teacher said, why do you want to do history? It's all about the past. Do biology, leave that, come to this, because this is about the future. And she at that time was working in genetics. And she's like, this is really the way of the future. Why are you doing this? And I said, well, I love both. And she said, but this is the future. Why look at the past? And that really made me wonder, why? Really, why? Why am I doing this? And then I read up on, why one needs to understand history, why is the past important, why one needs to engage with that. And a couple of quotations kind of remained in my head. I'll only share 2 in the interest of time. The first one was by this great doyen of history, E.H. Carr, who said in a very important book called What is History, that the past is a continuing conversation with the present to shape the future. So it is really, it connects the past and the present and the future, and that's the way that you need to kind of look at it. Another quotation which I really liked was of Winston Churchill. And Sir Winston said, the more you look into the past, the more you actually look into the future. And these 2 things really stuck with me, and I quote them quite often, actually. But that is the real reason why we indulge in the subject of history. It's not about dates. I was just yesterday, actually, at the Oxbridge Club, someone was making fun of me that we had a quiz night, and the one question I got wrong was, when was the 3rd Battle of Panipat? And I was like, here's the only person with a PhD in history in the group, and he gets that wrong. And I said, I don't really care which year it happened. I just want to know why it happened and what were the reasons behind it, and how did it impact the world then, and how does it impact it now? The year, and I was off by about 20 years, so imagine how bad I was there. If I was doing, I think, the metric or inter kind of a system, they would have failed me immediately, and you could see the difference there. So these 2 quotes were really critical in inspiring me to do history. And the third thing, which is also kind of always at the back of my mind, but it actually came up literally 5 minutes ago, was that we all stood up to sing the national anthem, right? And at the end of the national anthem, it has this wonderful line, which I hope people have read, at least in translation. I'll read the Urdu and then the English translation of it. It is, Tarjumane mazi shane hal jane istiqbal, right? Now, how many of you really understood that? I hope some of you did. But what does this translate to? Tarjumane mazi, the interpreter of our past. Tarjumane mazi shane hal jane istiqbal. Shane hal, the explainer of our present, right? And jane istiqbal, which is probably the most Farsi there, which is, it's our inspiration for our future, right? And even in our national anthem, it asks us to look at the past, to understand the present, and to study the future. So something that we kind of talk about, that we stand up for every single day, it actually has a great kernel of history in it. And we kind of forget that. And, as it was being sung now, it just occurred to me, and I said, wow, this is really that we need to engage in. So, again, the study of history kind of makes you that kind of a person where we need to kind of become a better human being and better understand our things. And, the theme I was actually thinking about, and Mubashir Saab, I kind of pushed him and said, why is this theme? What does Act Now mean? And he explained to me the whole idea behind it. And the Act Now idea was very important, of course, in terms of climate change and other things. But I would just point out two things where, from a historian's perspective, it's very important to understand, is that a lot of things happened in history because no one acted. So when we're speaking about Act Now, we are really also speaking about the people who in the past did not act, who did not do anything, because they did not learn from their past what had happened. So I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate that. The Indus Valley civilization, all of us have heard about Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. I hope some of you have been there too. We have no evidence of a war bringing it down. We have no evidence of a big famine bringing it down. We have no evidence of a disease bringing it down. And whereas we don't completely know what happened, but a large number of ancient history people and archaeologists think it was the river direction that changed, it was climate that changed. 4,000 years ago, climate change led to the end of one of the most dynamic and modern civilizations which the world had seen at that time. It fascinates me. I once took a school trip there to Harappa, and I was talking about, how they had sewage lines and running water and everything. And one kid said, well, we don't even have that in our area in Lahore. Let alone a village or anything else, So in 2800 BC, you had that at Harappa. And in 2008, Lahore, when I took that trip, one person was saying in this mega city, he didn't have access to that. That place came to an end because primarily of climate change. We again don't really talk about it. We don't even study it or locate it in any important manner. Another very important thing, which I think is very important in terms of Act Now, is when you look at yourself as a human being, the main question is of identity, right? And I really do want to spend a couple of minutes on it because, and I hope a lot of you will go abroad, but I hope a lot of you will also go abroad and come back, as I did. It wasn't a dumb thing. I still don't regret it, even though, of course, there are days I do, but on the whole, I don't. And the first question that occurs to me when I went outside, and as you know, I was not even 17 when I began my undergrad. I was just 16 and a bit. And the first question was, well, who are you? This was pre-9/11 days, so no one knew Pakistan because we weren't a part of anything dramatic. And I had to answer, who is a Pakistani? And if you have studied any bit of history, that is the most important question in Pakistan. That's the most perennial question from day one. What defines a Pakistani? Who is a Pakistani? And while in a few minutes I can't answer that, but I just want to make you think about that. I'll give you an example. A few days ago, I was talking to someone about cultural policy of Pakistan. And this person said, oh, we need a Pakistani cultural policy. And I replied to her and said, why don't we have a cultural policy for each of our 4 provinces and 2 territories? And when we put them together, that is Pakistan's cultural policy. And this very well-educated, erudite person said, but it's not real Pakistani, is it? And I asked her, what does it mean to be real Pakistani? And then she went on to define it, which, from her perspective, was included of Urdu and being a Muslim and being urban and all these other kinds of things. And I said, well, madam, it might be very good and valid for you, but it's not really the truth for anyone else. So why are you really talking about it? And she was very uncomfortable about it, but she was in her late 60s, early 70s, so I didn't want to push her too much. But do have a think about what makes you a Pakistani and how that can be an inclusive version without kicking anyone out of it. And that is the perennial question. Where in 1947, I'll give you a couple of examples, and some of them were actually, oddly enough, some people thought were controversial. So in one TV event, it got excised, but at least here I can say, because we are in a private place. In 1948, when the founder of the country, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, died, he had two funerals. One was a public one, the other was a private one. The private one was a Shia funeral because he was a Shia, and the public one was a Sunni funeral. And I've asked this question multiple times, and I said, why couldn't you do the Shia funeral publicly? What's the problem? And one person laughed and said, oh, it's longer than the Sunni one. And I was like, really? Founder of the country, created a whole country, practically died working for the country, and yet you are squabbling over which sect he came from for the funeral? Great, dramatic, kind of a bizarre kind of a question. I'll give you another example. In 1954-55, the question was, should Pakistan have joint or separate electorates? Now again, when Muslims were a minority in India, they wanted separate electorates because they wanted their identity to be shown in parliament. Interestingly enough, all minorities in Pakistan, specifically the Hindus at that time, and we completely forget, when Pakistan was created, 20% of our population was Hindu. Now it's not. That's another topic. All the minorities said, we want joint electorates. We want to create one country. We want to create one union. All of us are equally Pakistanis. Why isn't this being allowed? And what was interesting was, in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, where there were about 25% Hindus, they agreed on joint electorates. And in West Pakistan, which is now Pakistan, where there were 3% non-Muslims, they said, no, we are scared of those 3%. Let's have separate electorates here. Again, what does that say about the country, about its identity? I'll give you a third example, which is of our prime minister that we've kind of forgotten about, but he was our prime minister for about a year, from 56 to 57, Hussain Shahid Sohrawardi. I hope at least some of you have heard the name. He gave a very important speech once, and he said, Pakistan has to follow a one-nation theory. It cannot speak about a two-nation theory. And people were all worried about, what does this mean? And he said that the two-nation theory created Pakistan, but once Pakistan is created, it is one nation. It comes together as one country. Everyone's a Pakistani. When I read that, Jinnah's August 11 speech made sense, because he's talking about the exact same thing. And Sohrawardi said, if you break that, then Pakistan will actually fall apart, because you'll have to keep dividing Pakistan. So in 1956, he had practically said what happened in 71, but what is happening in different shapes and ways now. I'll just take one more minute. The third thing, the last thing that I really wanted to talk about, because this is something I'm currently working on, again, act now, very important, I think, is for all the young people here to engage with your city. I'm doing a huge project on Lahore. The history of Lahore is 2,000 years old, but we don't teach it, we don't engage with it, we don't know about it. Every weekend, I literally walk around Lahore with a guidebook and learn something new. It's a fascinating city. And there's so much to it. From a temple, I found a temple, you might not have heard of it, called the Sitla Devi Temple. It's an 1,100-year-old temple. And what's really fascinating is, it's outside the Shalmi Gate, if you know the area. And when I went there, I found people living there. There were 26 families living there. And when I asked them where you have come from or why are you here, they said, oh, we have all come from India, from eastern UP, district Muzaffarnagar. And for me, that was really a fascinating thing, because these are Muslims from India who fled Hindu persecution, but have come to Pakistan, and their refuge is a Hindu mandir. Look at the paradox in this whole kind of thing. So engage in your city. A lot of the city is falling apart. If you want to do a part in it, go and speak to different communities. Our different areas of Lahore are very different. You've got a Mughal bit, you've got the Sikh era, you've got the British era, and indulge, what we call public history. It's very important to indulge in ideas of public history. And I'll just give you a couple of examples and end. Street names. A lot of you, I hope, look after street names and look at what those street names are. I'll give you one example, Lawrence Road, right next to Lawrence Gardens. The name of the road has changed 5 times since 1948. At one time, it was called Liaquat Ali Khan Road, then it was called Zafar Ali Road, then it was called this, that. Now it's, I think, called Nizami Road or something. And the name Lawrence sticks. And one person asked me, and he said, you are a history person. Why do you think people refuse to change it? And I said, well, because poor John and Henry Lawrence did a lot of work for the city. Lawrence Gardens were actually built by them. What did these other people do? In fact, I argued, and I think that's a very important point to remember, by renaming a place for someone else is actually not showing respect to the new person, but is disrespecting that person. So when you name Lawrence Garden Bagh-e-Jinnah, you're not giving respect to the founder of the country. You're actually saying we can't be bothered to create a big park in your memory, so we will rename it in your memory. And it reminds me, I hope you've seen this hospital on Firozpur Road called Gulab Devi Hospital. Now, Gulab Devi was the mother of Lala Lajpat Rai, and she died with TB, so he wanted to have a hospital in her memory, and there's a trust that runs it. And Sir Syed Maratab Ali, the father of Syed Babar Ali, was the head of that trust. And in 1948, when they were having a trust meeting, someone said, let's change this Hindu name to a Muslim name. And he said something very critical, which I think is very important. He said, changing a name like this is like changing a tombstone on someone else's grave. There is a grave, and then you change the tombstone to someone else. It's as ridiculous as that. And he prevented that from being changed. And this is how you kind of, engage with your city. I could go on and on with lots of examples, but I hope I've given you enough to really think about it, how you yourself should first learn about your city, about your environment, about even the areas you live in, and then act in those areas to protect it through climate change issues, through just cleanliness drives, through teaching people about the city, about what they have. Because, again, we are in this great environment, which if we do not make it a part of our lives, out of our, part of our lived experience, we'll never be able to go further. I know I've gone terribly out of time, but thank you so much for listening to me.